I'm Andy Agathangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. The Transparency Task Force, or TTF, is a certified social enterprise all the way back to 2015. And since then, we've been battling pretty much day in, day out to try to get the financial industry to behave the way that we want it to. We want a financial services sector that is transparent, that's truthful, that's trustworthy. And of course, that's not what we've got right now. The TTF is campaigning on, I think, about 14 or 15 fronts right now on all sorts of issues. At the heart of them, at the heart of all of them, is the very real chance of very real consumer detriment. And whilst it saddens me to say it, the reality is that much of that potential or real consumer detriment is due to one kind of catastrophic regulatory failure or another. Back in 2015, when we started the TTF, we really did think of the regulators as a big part of the solution. But over the years, we've learnt that for various reasons, the regulators seem to be consistently underperforming in one particularly important area, and that is consumer protection. We created the Woodford campaign group a while ago. We were genuinely surprised that despite the fact that the Woodford scandal affects, tens and thousands of people, it really does not seem to be a well-coordinated affair. There seem to be quite different groups of some people represented by law firm X, some people represented by law firm Y. And we felt there was a need to create some kind of generic community for people who had in some way lost out because of Woodford. And that's what led to the Woodford campaign group. We've been meeting monthly for about a year or so. And I'm very pleased to say that I think it was on Wednesday last week, the idea of this event came up. And in a pretty short period of time, we've managed to turn the idea into a reality. And here we have a Zoom meeting with about 120 people on it, organised very, very quickly indeed. I want you to understand that behind the scenes, there has been a huge amount of work done by volunteers such as Alan Pyatt and Neil Taylor and Mark Bishop, and members of my staff, Chelsea, who's not with us tonight, but also Alexandra who is. And if you don't mind, folks, ladies and gentlemen, can I please invite you to, first of all, show your appreciation for the work done by the volunteers and the staff at TTF to make this event happen, because without their input, it clearly could not possibly have occurred. So please do take a moment to put your hands together. Thank you, Alexandra, Alan, Mark, Neil, and all the others, Linda, all the others involved in actually making this event happen. I'll talk about the TTF and other things relating to us in due course, but let me just basically share with you the overall concept of tonight. The overall concept of tonight is to share insights, ideas, and information about the Woodford situation, particularly as it relates to the link letter. And we are not going to hold back when talking about the things that are of real concern. We are genuinely concerned that there is a chance that people may misunderstand what is being asked of them, misunderstand the information that's being sent out to them. And frankly, and I will be frank, we are concerned that some of that misunderstanding might almost be by design. Depending on how cynical you are, you might be of the view that an incomplete picture is being given to Woodford investors. And we'll touch on those sorts of themes as we go. To begin with, we're going to be hearing from our first proper speaker, Sunil Chadha. Sunil has been a Transparency Task Force ambassador, I think pretty much since day one, Sunil. Sunil has probably an unrivaled level of depth and knowledge when it comes to all kinds of things in the investment world, particularly around things like the need for greater transparency on costs and charges, consumer detriment, and so on. And Sunil has very kindly agreed to just spend a few minutes talking about the bigger picture. Why is it that retail investors in the UK are exposed to frankly, an unfair level of risk. What's going on at the moment that's leading to the harsh reality that people like Sunil are becoming increasingly concerned about consumer protection rights in the investment space, particularly for retail investors like most of you folks. So can I please invite you to, again, put your hands together, say hi, Sunil, over to you. For a few minutes, please share with everybody the sorts of things that are causing you to have some real concerns about what's going on, Sunil. Thank you. Cheers.
Yes. Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me on today, Andy. I just wanted to make the point that this isn't just about Woodford. I think this is a watershed moment for the retail investor. Just to provide some context on me, I'm obviously a Transparency Task Force ambassador. I've got 40-odd years of financial services experience. I've consulted in every sector, hedge funds, asset management, more or less every continent on the around the world. And finally, I should also mention I'm a secretariat member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Personal Banking and Fairer Financial Services. And obviously I do my ambassador role and my APPG role for free, because I do feel very strongly about what's happening. If I may, I said there's a broader context. As I've said, watershed moment for the retail investor, this whole Woodford saga. But I just wanted to provide a backdrop. We've had 14 years of quantitative easing. And during those 14 years, we have borrowed tomorrow's returns, and we've had them since 2008. So if the government is looking for growth, it's very unlikely to come. If it does come, it's going to be anemic, and it might go for a while. So until asset prices and the economy catches up with the amount of money that's been pumped into it. So we're seeing the end of quantitative easing. We've got high inflation, high interest rates, and they're all negatives for companies' growth and stock markets, just to point that out. And many think a recession is looming. Now, obviously, the UK has left the European Union. The European Union, I might add, is deregulating just like we are. We are deregulating, and I think retail is one of the focuses. So just to give you some examples, please, of just where and how we are deregulating. The Productive Finance Initiative to stick 5% private equity into our pensions. I wrote the Transparency Task Force response to that. So private equity in our pensions, no FCA private market study has ever been undertaken. There will be no costs and charges disclosures, I understand, for investors in these funds. Instead, we'll get a value for money statement written by the private equity manager who sold you the investment and manages it. Now, clearly, that is not governance, right? So that's the first thing. Soft commissions that we all thought had gone. They're coming back. They're already back, and they're coming back to pay for research in funds. It's not just the UK. The European Union are looking at the same thing. Cost disclosures. If I look at the cost disclosures on UK retail platforms, and I think you know who I mean, that's the whole lot. They all look wrong to me for funds, investment trusts, and a lot of other things. And we're now in the new Consumer Duty, from the 31st of July, and I see no change. All of these things are still wrong. So cost disclosures, and this week, and this is the worrying thing for me, the FCA now has a competition mandate. I think last week they refused to place SMCR, the Senior Managers Certification Regime, on overseas investment bankers because it might put them off coming here. Right now, I think we all remember 2008 and what happened. Right, so we are lowering the barriers again, and we're discriminating against our own bankers. So we're going to have foreign bankers in here, investment bankers who probably can do whatever they like and leave with no, So what I'm saying is we're setting the culture, we're deregulating, and we're going the wrong way. I think you've all seen the ACD market with Link. I promise you there's many more of these out there, the smaller external ACDs. And in my honest to God opinion, they don't have the balance sheet and they do not have the skills to challenge a Neil Woodford when he walks in the door with a fund idea. All right, so I'm looking at the external ACDs and the internal ACDs. All the big asset managers have an internal ACD, and all I see is increasing profitability. I see governance issues. So it's all about profit and nothing else. And I think with the ACD model, it's absolutely broken, in my opinion. And certainly it has impacted the funds that I invest in, because I'm not touching an external ACD, because mark my words, this is going to happen again. All right. So the minute we have some market volatility, big drops, we're going to see this again, I think. Right. So this is onto the crux of it for me. So I believe, and I think a number of the TTF ambassadors and staff believe, the FCA has modelled compensation down for the FSCS. All right. I'm pretty sure that's true. Then we move on to Woodford and Link. The industry does not want to fund the Financial Services Compensation Scheme compensation for Woodford investors, and quite rightly so, because they had nothing to do with it. The rest of the industry's done nothing. We have a complex around Link and the FCA, a depository, a custodian. For me, they're all, they're more likely to be the candidates to pay for this than the rest of the industry. And as I said, the retail investor has very little power. So the industry is refusing to pay, and it looks like it's all being pushed on the retail investor, who has little or no power to push back, little or no power to do anything. So really, if you look at it, investors are now caught in a pincer movement, falling regulatory protections, poor monitoring and enforcement, falling compensation, and a new rule set, the consumer duty, which came in on the 31st of July. And I note there is no private action. So I think you can see that all us retail investors are in a room with no doors or windows. And that's where we're going. So really, the Woodford saga is absolutely a watershed moment for the retail investor in UK financial services. And if we accept this, we will have set the precedent for more. All right, this is the new norm. And I'm sorry, it's outrageous. I can tell you we have laws missing around cost disclosures and UK PRIPS. So if firms break the rule book and the regulator refuses to do anything, guess what? There's nothing you can do under UK law. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say. We're deregulating in a number of different ways. The retail investor, for me, is absolutely in the firing line. And very soon, active management is going to have a huge question mark over it from my perspective, because I will not be touching it. That's my marker.
Sunil, thank you very much indeed for getting the event going. I think Sunil is absolutely right to make the point that we really shouldn't see the Woodford scandal in isolation as some kind of a one-off incident. The trend and the underlying causes that allowed Woodford to happen are sadly still with us. So Sunil, thank you very much. In a moment, we're going to be hearing from Paul. Paul is with a remarkable organisation called Truth Unlocked. We got to know Paul, his colleague Chris, and Truth Unlocked through Sunil. Let me tell you a little bit about what they do in my very, very kind of plain English way of explaining things. Truth Unlocked is all about looking at the words people use to try to suss whether they're telling you the truth. There we go. I think that sums it up in one simple statement. It's a fascinating area of work. Paul will be explaining a bit more about that in a moment. And the reason it's so relevant to us is because we need to understand the likelihood or the possibility that we may be on the receiving end of deceptive information. You'll understand by the end of today's session, if you don't already, that this idea of deceptive information is really important. So can we do two things simultaneously? One, say thank you to Sunil, and two, welcome Paul to the mic. Paul, thank you very much. Sunil, thank you very much. Paul, over to you. Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Maladet, Director of Truth Unlocked. We've got over 30 years experience in criminal linguistic analysis and market leaders in the UK. We use linguistic analysis, which until recently was the remit of the FBI and the CIA. And its genesis stems from lie detectors, polygraphs, which were found to be unreliable. And we now train a group of international analysts, including the FBI, Homeland Security and law enforcement, on a monthly basis on the techniques that we used for the analysis we did on this. So the criminal linguistic analysis techniques we use and teach can determine if someone is truthful or deceptive, and can identify key areas where further investigation may be required. and advise the specific questions that should be asked. We were introduced to the TTF by Sunil Chadha, thanks Sunil, and have provided our analysis for them on Woodford Investors, Bluegate Capital, and LIBOR lowballing of interest rates. In addition to the training that we provide, we're currently involved in the team that is reinvestigating the potential further victims of an infamous US serial killer. We're advising on a high-profile double murder case in the US, which is featured in Warner Brothers' award-winning podcast. And we're actively involved in an Irish cold case at the request of the family, which has been the feature of a Netflix documentary. We also recently advised on a $30 million anonymous letter extortion case, and our remit was, do we pay them the money? And we were able to tell them not to pay, and provided linguistic profile, which enabled them to confirm the author's identity. So our analysis being used in cases also that were ruled as suicide or accidents, and which are now being reopened as murder investigations. And we're currently assisting the UK police in an active sexual assault case. So the analysis we provide is successful across different spectrums, which includes insurance fraud, financial fraud, criminal and civil cases, HR disputes, and stock market analysis, to name but a few. But we're grateful to the TTF for today, and thank you all for listening. And we look forward to working with the TTF and Woodford Investors moving forwards.
Well, thank you very much indeed for giving us a clear and interesting explanation of what Truth Unlocked does. So chaps and ladies, Truth Unlocked are hopefully going to, on a completely pro bono basis, take a look at the comms that have been coming out regarding the Woodford scandal and just help us understand where it appears that there may be, I'm using very polite language here, incomplete or potentially misleading information. That's what we're looking for. That's why the guys have got involved in this. Paul, thank you very much indeed, sir. We're now going to go to Mark Bishop. I think some of you know Mark already. Mark is just a phenomenal resource and ally and subject matter expert on so many things. He's been spending a huge amount of time on the Woodford scandal, working with people like Neil Taylor and Linda and Alan and others as a key part of the Woodford campaign group. Can I please invite you to do two things again? Say thank you to Paul whilst also welcoming Mark to the mic. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Mark. Cheers. Thanks all. Mr. Mark Bishop, over to you, sir. Thank you. You might be on mute, Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Andy. So I'm just going to share screen because I've got a presentation. Okay, thank you. So this is my quick presentation. I'm going to give you a little bit of a kind of overview of background to how we got here. As soon as we decided to hold this event, Transparency Task Force invited Therese Chambers, who is Executive Director for Enforcement at the FCA, to attend this evening's event, or alternatively to send a colleague in her stead. The Executive Casework Department, which basically handles correspondence on behalf of some of the senior members of the FCA team, replied on her behalf, declining the invite. However, it offered to answer any questions we might have in advance of the meeting. Consequently, we submitted 13 questions. The FCA's position was that it would answer them, and that remained its position until as recently as 12:43 this afternoon, or just after lunch. Unfortunately, at 16:33 this afternoon, so an hour and a half before the session was due to begin, we received this message. It's very small, so I'm going to read it for you. And I think it is important that I do read all of it, because there are some things that I'll probably want to pick up on in this presentation, and some people may also wish to discuss later. So it says, "Dear Mark, thank you for your email. In the limited time available, it has not been possible to provide detailed responses to each of your questions. Some questions, such as those concerning the operational rules of the scheme, are better directed to Link Fund Solutions Limited, LFSL, or to the Investor Advocate. Additionally, a number of your questions would be difficult for us to answer because of the statutory confidentiality requirements placed on us by the Financial Services and Markets Act 2000. However, we are keen to be as helpful as possible in the time available. As a result, we've set out our position, which I hope addresses the substance of your inquiries. We have been in regular communication with LFSL since the scheme was announced. That engagement is included on the design of the scheme and its communication to investors. It's important to set out the scheme on which Woodford investors are being asked to vote, however, is proposed by LFSL. LFSL is responsible for designing it in a manner that is fair to all investors. Nonetheless, there are safeguards in place. The scheme will be subject to the oversight of the court to ensure that it's fair. We recognise investors must receive clear communications to understand the potential consequences of the scheme and, when deciding how to vote, to consider what might be the best option for them. For this reason, the FCA is supportive of the steps LFSL has taken, including the formation of an investors committee, the appointment of an independent investors advocate, and the provision of information on a bespoke website. The FCA considers these arrangements are appropriate and would encourage investors to take advantage of them. We will remain closely involved throughout the process. The FCA is not able to provide advice to individual investors. However, we continue to believe that the scheme, which includes a voluntary contribution from Link Group, is the quickest and best way to return as much money to investors as possible. If it were to go ahead, the scheme would be likely to pay out in 2024. If the scheme does not receive approval, the alternative would be litigation, which Link has said it would fight, and potentially claims to the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. The outcome of both will be uncertain, neither is likely to be quick, and significant costs are likely to be incurred in the legal claim. This scheme offers payments as soon as early 2024 if it goes ahead. We think that this better serves consumers' interests. We encourage consumers to consider it very carefully. The reserve fund held will allow LFSL to meet reasonable costs associated with the scheme. Holding this fund will allow investors to be paid the rest of the money as quickly as possible in the first quarter of 2024. Any leftover in the reserve will be ultimately distributed to investors. We recognise that this is a difficult decision for Woodford investors who have waited for greater certainty over a number of years. We believe it's important that they get the best and clearest information on the proposed scheme. We've worked with LFSL to ensure that this is the case. It is also important to be clear that the scheme offers investors greater certainty of payment versus or the possibility of an uncertain sum at some point many years from now. I hope the meeting goes well this evening and is productive for the victims of this investment. With thanks. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to go through the questions that we put to the FCA and maybe talk a little bit about why that question is significant in the context of the regulator, because the regulator has a operational objective which is kind of handed to it by Parliament to provide a reasonable degree of protection for consumers. So if at any point it looks as though consumers in the Woodford Equity Income Fund are not being given a reasonable degree of protection, you have every right to look towards the FCA and say, please intercede on our behalf so we are protected to this reasonable standard. So the first question is, was the FCA given sight of the letter from Link Fund Solutions to investors dated the 7th of September prior to its publication? And the reason why this matters is that some people believe that there are things that are unclear in that letter, maybe some misrepresentations and some omissions. And I'll cover some of those as I go through the other questions. Question 2, is the FCA comfortable that this letter fairly represents the facts of the case and the options available to consumers for achieving redress? So in a way that is kind of a more detailed version of the first question. You know, it's saying, do you really think that this is a fair statement? The third question, it has been widely claimed that Link Group will contribute up to £60 million to the proposed settlement. In fact, Therese Chambers has claimed that in a statement. In fact, the small print of the letter indicates that £50 million will be retained to meet the liabilities of Link Fund Solutions, cover sale-related costs, and fight any litigation for investors who exited the fund before it was gated. On that basis, the contribution from Link Group may be as little as £10 million. Does the FCA consider this to be a good deal for investors? Obviously, it's made public statements suggest it is a good deal, and that's pretty much what was said in its email to me this afternoon. Question 4. Does the FCA agree that one of the routes by which investors might be compensated is the FCA obtaining a restitution order against Link Fund Solutions, which would then go into default, basically become insolvent, with the shortfall passing to the FSCS, this is the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, for payment, subject to the statutory limit of £85,000 per eligible consumer? And if so, is it concerned that this option is not spelled out and its merits considered in the letter? In my personal opinion, this is probably the single biggest weakness of the letter of the 7th of September, and it's actually echoed by the email that I read out to you just this evening. The FCA is presenting, and Link is presenting, the only alternative to the deal that's on the table being litigation. And of course, it's true that litigation will take multiple years. The lawyers will take big chunks out of it, and it's very uncertain. But given the amount of evidence that the FCA has of wrongdoing by Link Fund Solutions and what amounts to an admission, of course, there's no legal admission liability, but an acceptance of this liability and Link's attitude to paying up at this point, I don't think that getting a restitution order would be difficult. I can't see Link fighting it. So the omission of this option, I think, is quite a significant flaw in the letter that you've received so far. So question 5, does the FCA accept that a restitution order honoured by the FSCS offers the potential to deliver materially greater financial redress to Woodford investors, and that the probability of such an order being granted is extremely high given the evidence against Link Fund Solutions? Again, I can understand why they might not want to answer this question, because a truthful answer would probably undermine the prospects of this deal being accepted. Question 6, there are suggestions that the letter may not have been passed on to consumers by some platforms and IFAs. Was the FCA consulted by Link Fund Solutions on its plans for distributing the letter, and has it expressed any concerns either prior to or subsequent to the letter's publication? So I think we have to here have a nuanced view. On the one hand, data protection laws are what they are, and it probably isn't possible for the platforms all to pass client details to Link and Link to contact people direct. But I would have thought the FCA could make sure that the platforms do contact all of their consumers. And if that hasn't happened, and the survey that we sent out, I think it was this morning, does seem to suggest that it probably hasn't happened in all cases, there's obviously a cause for concern. We've also found out that there appears to be some cases, at least one case we know of a platform, Quilter in this case, actually deciding to vote on behalf of the consumer. And this is significant because a lot of shares are held, or in this case, unit trust units are held on behalf of consumers by platforms in nominee accounts. If they choose to exercise their rights, they could vote on behalf of the consumers. And of course, maybe they wouldn't want to alienate their regulator, so they might well vote for the proposal, even if their underlying consumers might not wish this to happen. So question 7, to what extent is the FCA engaged in dialogue with Link Fund Solutions about the proposed structure of any scheme of arrangement vote? In particular, will all classes of investor be treated identically, or will institutional shareholders vote separately to private ones, which we believe is essential because the former are unlikely to be FSCS eligible, so have different economic interests to the latter. So I'll explain what this is about. I'm sure you know that there were institutional shareholders in this fund, for example, local authority pension schemes. I think there might have been police pension schemes, things like that would have millions of pounds invested. Because they are not individual citizens, if they lose money in a fund, that's tough. They don't get compensated by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. So if they're offered peanuts by Link, that's a much better option for them than this whole thing going down the route of restitution and FSCS, or litigation and FSCS, because they're not going to get a penny from the FSCS. So if there was an intention by Link to rig the vote, they would say all investors in this fund will be treated as one class for the vote. The way it should work in a scheme of arrangement is where there are identifiable groups of creditors that have different economic interests, they are allowed to vote separately, and you need a majority of every class of investor to get the deal through and therefore impose it on all the investors. So it matters very much how this is going to be done. Question 8, is the FCA aware that many private investors in the Woodford Equity Income Fund in fact hold, quotes, institutional units in the fund, because certain platforms were allocated their own institutional class units for customers at launch, Hargreaves Lansdowne, for example? Will the FCA ensure that any separation of voting by class of holding reflects the actuality of the type of investor as opposed to the nominal class of holding? So this is another way this could be rigged. Basically allow the platforms that issues these institutional class shares to regard them as institutional shares, even though they're held by private citizens. Question 9, does the FCA believe that its permission is required for change, should be change not chance, of ownership of Link Fund Solutions? If so, does it intend to grant such permission while the issue of redress for Woodford investors, whether through the proposed scheme of arrangement, the restitution order obtained by the FCA, litigation or any other means, has been resolved? And in brackets, currently, according to the letter, the intention is for sale to complete before the matter is resolved. We cannot see how a firm can undergo a change of ownership while it is at material risk of enforcement action and insolvency. So the point here is, if the FCA wants to do the right thing for consumers, it could say to Link, we are not going to authorise the sale of Link Fund Solutions until you have squared matters with these investors, however long or short a time it takes. And if they turn down the scheme of arrangement proposal, which I think is the right thing to do, but others may disagree. If they turn it down, then we, the FCA, will go down the restitution route, and only once that restitution is paid can you sell this business. And that would be a very effective route because, of course, they would never get to sell it. It would become insolvent and the business would be killed, and therefore it would not be able to damage further consumers. And I'm sure you're aware that it has damaged previous consumers in the Commonwealth Income Fund Series 1 and in Arch Crew. So it's a serial offender that every time has been allowed to get away with wrongdoing in return for paying a sum of money towards the consumer's losses under the aegis of a deal agreed with the FCA. So question 10, was the FCA consulted on the arrangements for representing investors' interests set up by Link Fund Solutions communicated to date? So these are the Investors Advocate, the Investors Committee, and the choices of post holders for these roles. If so, was it happy with them, or did it make representations that were not actioned? If so, what were they? So this matters because, it may be that some people feel that, there's not as much engagement from some of those people who are set up to represent their interests as they might like. So, for example, we've been told by the Investors Advocate that it will not be possible for any of us to contact the Investors Committee chair. So the Investors Committee chair is supposedly independent, it's described as independent in that FCA email, but actually has been appointed by Link. So is this person really acting in the interests of investors, or are they not? It's unclear. And question 11, was the FCA consulted on any arrangements for representing investors' interests set up by Link Fund Solutions that have not yet been made public, including but not limited to any arrangements for investors to attend and participate in the 10th of October court hearing and any subsequent ones? If so, what are those arrangements? Is it happy with them, or has it made representations that Link Fund Solutions has declined to action? If so, what were they? So it's a long question. It's basically trying to flush out, has the FCA been trying to represent and improve the interests, pursue the interests of consumers in the way that the actual scheme of arrangement will progress beyond this point, trying to find out what the arrangements are. Question 12, if concerns crystallise about whether the process is being run fairly and transparently and in the interest of investors, will the FCA agree to work with investors to resolve those concerns? This is quite an important question, really, because, as I said earlier, the FCA actually has an objective handed to it by law that it should secure a reasonable degree of protection for consumers. So if consumers were able to demonstrate that this process was not being run fairly and transparently and in the interests of investors, then the FCA ought to agree to work with them to try and find a solution to that. If the answer to this question is yes, then that means that there is the potential for dialogue to resolve any problems. If the answer is no, then the FCA is basically saying it's abrogating its statutory duties. And therefore, I can imagine it probably is quite keen not to answer this question, but it's really important we do try and get one. And finally, question 13. Does the FCA plan, 1, to attend, and 2, to be legally represented at the hearing on the 10th of October? The reason why this is important is it may be that between now and the 10th of October, all sorts of concerns will emerge. I think that they have already today, and I'm sure that they will when Alan speaks soon, about how this whole thing is being handled. The FCA perhaps ought to be represented at that event, that hearing, in order that it can express concerns on behalf of consumers. Again, bear in mind, it does have the statutory consumer protection objective. So really, the next steps are, we will continue to seek replies from the FCA in due course. We are likely to distribute them if we're permitted to do so. We've made it clear that that's what we want to do. We will also almost certainly give the FCA the video of this event so that they can hear concerns that are being expressed about this scheme and how it's being operated so far, and give them an opportunity to intervene on consumers' interests in respect of any concerns that have been identified. So that's the end of my slides. I'm now going to stop sharing. I don't know whether, Andy, we're going to questions or we're going straight to Alan and his presentation.
Mark, the first thing we're going to do is take a moment to thank you for the preparation for your presentation, the work that you've been doing behind the scenes on the Woodford situation for months, and in particular in the last week or so. So can I please invite everybody to first of all put their hands together to thank Mark Bishop, and we will go to Q&A. Mark's covered a lot of ground very, very quickly and in a remarkably efficient way, the way that he always does. But please feel free to ask questions, either write them into the chat or raise your hand, be that digitally or literally, if you want to draw my attention. I'll go to what's called gallery view so I can hopefully see some of you. Just raise a hand if you want to. I think Alan wants to come in with one first of all.
Yeah.
Alan, yeah, go for it.
Andy, just a point of interest, I'm going to cover quite a lot of stuff, which is going to generate a lot of questions.
Yeah, yeah.
And some of it's covering, because what I've done and what Mark's done does cross over a bit, but there are different views on that.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm just conscious of time as well. We've got what, 15 minutes left. So
Yeah, understood. That's all absolutely fine. Don't worry, Alan. Don't worry about that.
yeah, I don't want to stump people, but what's coming next is the juggernaut. You've left the best.
Yeah. Alan's right. Brace yourself for what's coming, folks. But does anybody have any questions? Anything that they want to have clarified from what Mark has just covered? Don't hesitate to let us know if you do. Mr. Paul Carlier, as succinctly as you can, folks. Most of you won't know Paul because you're quite new to TTF, most of you. Paul's another legend within the TTF community. He's like a one-man army, believe me. Mr. Carlier, as succinctly as you can, go for it.
Yeah, I have a question, but I'll wait till the end for the other one. But one question to Mark. When did you send the questions to the FCA?
I think it was yesterday morning.
Yeah.
And right until this lunchtime, they were saying that they were going to get the replies back to us in time for this event.
Okay, so typically journalists give the FCA 24 hours to respond and provide answers to questions like that, and they're able to do it. So
yeah, they've had double that. So
yeah.
I think they ought to have been able to have replied. I accept that some things would have involved confidential information, so we could have said we can't answer this bit. But the substance of the vast majority, which I think they could probably have answered.
One little thing, I put it in the chat as well, that it's interesting that the FCA referred to everyone as victims of this, which I think is something to make a note of.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Mark, Mr. David Martin just put a question into the chat. You know the insides out to this, upside down, back to front. David's question is, can the FCA be sued for compensation given they appear to have failed in their responsibilities? Mark, as succinctly as you can. Thank you.
A brilliant question, and the matter that we raised with the Economic Secretary to Treasury just this lunchtime. The current legal position is there are only two circumstances under which you can sue the FCA. One is human rights breach, the other one is bad faith. Human rights breach is, in essence, that your human rights were breached, and this includes the right to quiet enjoyment of your property. Your human rights were breached. I feel it's pretty clear. But in confidence, I've been involved in a collective investment scheme before where we got legal advice from really top KC specialising in human rights law. The problem is that the European Court of Human Rights is quite an irrational organisation, and it really, amongst other things, requires you to bring your claim within weeks of finding out that your human right was breached. I think your claim is already out of time by a big margin. This is me expressing a personal opinion. I stress I'm not a lawyer. As far as bad faith is concerned, there is possibly a bad faith claim here. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I've had a conversation with a really good lawyer who thinks that there might be a good claim. That the claim would essentially be that the FCA, in choosing to accept compensation for the victims, partial compensation in the Archcrew and Connaught cases, when it knew that what was Capital Financial Managers is now Link Fund Solutions was essentially a defective firm, knowingly put future consumers at risk. So you guys have lost billions because people like me and Connaught lost, 100 million. This is knowingly failing to perform their statutory duties. Now, in an ideal world, they would have taken a direct bung. A member of staff takes a bung and they ignore wrongdoing. That didn't happen. Effectively, what happened was they took a reputational bung. The FCA was able to pay off some of its critics, in order to, in return for, going easy on a firm that really should have been taken out of the market. It's an untried argument. It might possibly work. There are lots of questions about who would bring the claim, who would fund it, stuff like that. There are challenges to it, but it's not impossible. You can go via the complaint scheme. The complaint scheme is about to be renewed. There's going to be revised wording from the 1st of November. But my personal opinion is that they have reworded it in such a way that it's probably not going to be judicially reviewed, but it also probably will never pay out substantial sums for regulatory failure. So it's going to be a challenge.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Superb stuff, absolutely superb stuff. We're going to switch now from Mark to Alan. Just before Alan picks up the mic, as it were, we're going to refer to the question Neil Taylor just put in the chat. Cracking question, Neil. Please, everybody, make sure you register to attend the online annual public meeting of the FCA, and obviously attend it if you can. Whether you attend it or not, submit questions, because the policy decision the FCA make on those annual public meetings is they will answer everybody's questions. I've just put a link to the chat. Sorry, I've just put a link to the webpage where you can book yourselves onto the 4th of October annual public meeting. And in the booking process, you're invited to ask questions, ask away. Thank you very much. Miss Alan Pyatt, like Mark Bishop, you've been doing a phenomenal amount of work in the last week or so. I don't know, today's been particularly busy. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together to thank Mark, whilst also welcoming Alan Pyatt, one of the Woodford campaign group leaders, to the mic. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, Alan. Over to you, Alan. Go for it, sir. Thank you.
Right. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So first, a bit about me, a bit boring, but there's a reason why I'm involved in this. So as you can see, I invested in WEF in 2018. I retired a few years ago, so money is important to me. Unfortunately, I only found out a week or so ago that I actually have institutional shares and not retail shares, which has come to the fore here. So most private investors and most people on this call who are private investors will find out if they look into it that they more likely have either the Class Z or the Class C shares, which are institutional shares. And I'll come on to that again later when I talk about the investor advocate. I'm very passionate about this subject, and that's why I volunteered. And I'm currently the one who's submitting questions on behalf of TTF members to the investor advocate, and I'll be coming on to that later on. And as I'll be saying later on, the full list of questions and responses we have to date. And I got a load about 4 o'clock this afternoon, even though I've done all my slides this morning. I've had to recut them all. And we think that's just down to the legal eagles waiting till the last 12th hour to give you something. Even if the settlement was fully paid out, which is not likely for reasons I'll come on to later, my losses stand at 36%. I'm not tripping about that, but other people on this call will say, yeah, mine's 42, mine's 40. But out there, people seem to understand it's a small loss. It's not. It's quite a big loss. And lastly, I'm very concerned about the settlement process. I think private investors are being marginalised, and I've actually put shafted by link and institutional block. The institutional block will take the vote, but we'll try and stop that if we can. So some important numbers, and these can be found if you look very hard at all the different link reports of it. So since 2016, the fund has lost a staggering £2.6 billion of capital losses. So this is down to things like write-down of assets and also selling things for less than you bought it for, which is a significant number. If we bring that down to since the fund was closed or gated, that number is £940 million. How somebody can lose that sort of money and write things off is ridiculous. And if you look at Link's offer, that the paltry 235 million, which is smoke and mirrors, even if we got all that, we'd only get just under 25% of those losses. So it's just basically a minimalist offer. And also the residual assets as of the 31st of March this year are currently 34.5 million. And last in that year, up to that date, they lost £43 million in capital losses. And as I said at the bottom there, it will continue. So when we come to other things later on, the 50 million may not be much of that left either. Right, I'm just going to a little bit about the practice letter so people are on the sort of same page, and there are some questions that we've put to the investor advocate about this. They've gone through the platforms. I actually got some information later on, which I'll share with you how many platforms they've been to, and we already know a number of people haven't received it. If you're on this symposium and you haven't done the survey yet, please do the survey. That will give us more information, particularly about who's not doing it correctly. Unfortunately, the letter that's come from Link, the PSL, is very verbose. It's misleading. It doesn't even give the private investor or anybody how much money you're actually going to get. And Link can't give the exact number, but they should be able to give you a range per class of share. And this has been passed to Clifford Chant by the IA, and he wants to know that as well. There's a court case on the 10th of October, which Link are trying to get approval, call a creditor scheme vote, which will be a virtual vote on the 4th of December. They also want to cluster all the share classes into a single vote. So coming to back what Mark said, they're trying to cluster everybody together. And again, about the 4th of November, at the moment, we don't know what the scheme is or anything. At the bottom there, you can see a response from the investor advocate. He said, each scheme creditor will have one vote, but entitled to vote for the amount equal to the value of the shares that they directly held. So at the time of closure, if you had £50,000 of shares, you get a vote, but it will be for that value against the massive 3.6 billion. So the more investors we can get together, the better. Right, now here's some terms and some things that have come back that I've only had to put in today. If you see anything in the cyan color, light blue, where it says S10.1, that means it's in section 10.1. It can point you directly to it. So the investment committee, we all thought that investment committee was for us. It's not. It's there to represent the interests of us. But the primary purpose is to help Link Fund Solutions come up with a fair scheme for all investors of how they'll be paid. They are not open to us. We cannot communicate with them, etc. It is only the investor advocate who can be approached by investors and not the investor committee. That's a direct quote that came this afternoon from the investor advocate. The investor advocate himself, very importantly, and that's an extract as well, he will only answer general questions about the scheme or feedback on it. So if you want to talk to him about Hargreaves Lansdown doing this, or Quilter are going to take my vote off me, you can tell him about it, but he can't comment on it. It's very important that we know that it's to be approved, it's the majority number of people of 50% representing 75% of the value of the fund. And it's only for those that vote at the meeting. So the virtual meeting that's happening, I suppose, on the 4th of December, if you vote or don't vote, you need to vote, basically. There are two things that will approve the scheme: if they meet the thresholds and the court approves the scheme. But most importantly for everybody, every investor, it is binding on you. So if you vote or don't vote, if it goes through and is approved, you'll get whatever pennies they're going to give us, and that'll be it. More importantly, on page 2 of the PSL, the highlighted bits, it says you basically can't take Link Fund Solutions, its parent company or related parties to court. And even if you do try other third parties to court, if FSL have to pay, it'll be limited, but they won't pay those claims. The last bit on that slide talks about a direct quote that says investors will each receive the same percentage payment because the settlement fund will be shared proportionally amongst relevant investors according to the number and class of their shares. Again, we don't know that. Hopefully it will appear. Right, so the money. So the document crosses a number of things. Basically, the settlement fund was £235 million, but in reality, it's only 180. They've taken 5 for what they call their costs, and a 50 million reserve fund to meet excluded liabilities, detailed in section 5.13. So basically, that will just get less and less and less because I'll spend it on all sorts of different things. They then say, and there's a debt quote there saying, scheme creditors will get up to 77% of the FCA total. Since we've had 5 capital distributions so far, we've all supposedly had 70% or about 70p in the pound per share. So if the full 235 was to give a theoretical maximum of 7p in the pound only, they keep harping on about there'll be a payment in January, but that will only be from the 180 million pound that's left. With a bit of maths, basically that comes out to be something like 4 to 5p a share, with about a 15 or 20% up or down on that thing. So 4 or 5p a share isn't that a large amount of money from my perspective. Right, I've already mentioned about the investor advocate. He'll take things, but it's important to understand the investor advocate will physically be at the court on the 10th of October. He'll be represented by a barrister, and he will be submitting a general report to the court of his findings from the questions that we raise, the feedback he's getting. He is independent, although we'll find out later he is being paid and contracted by Link Fund Solutions. And at the second court hearing, he'll also submit a further report. So therefore, Mr. Bannister is a very, very important person to us investors. We need to keep him on side if we can. We submitted 40 questions on the 13th of September. Unfortunately, their first response was 38 or 15 of those were sent to Clifford Chance, the lawyers for LFL, for Link Fund Solutions, to get the responses, which I have received this afternoon. Some of it is very verbose. There were 5 areas we've focused on: the actual letter itself, the role of the investor advocate, the investors committee, the court hearing, and the scheme meeting on the 4th. We've submitted 4 other questions, and I expect there'll be more coming their way. Right, now this is a bit where I've just extracted certain parts. Tomorrow, we hope to send the full version. Unfortunately, I've also had a whole load of articles and what's been sent to the platforms, etc. So we've got a large amount of information to give out. So where it's highlighted, on the left-hand side, the question in black. On the right-hand side, you've got the red, which is their response. I'm only going to highlight certain parts because it will take too long. One of the questions was how they make sure that everybody's been touched by them, because Link have not gone to the investors. And what they said, they've gone to 98 platforms, intermediaries, etc., etc., and they can't guarantee that the platforms will pass it on. Well, I know in my case, I'm with James Hay, they never did. They basically published it on your account and hoped you'd find it or don't find it from that side of things. We asked them about the scheme arrangement, how do we vote, etc. And they said that voting instructions won't be published until after the 10th of October, and it will be on the website. So this is the website that Link Fund Solutions will put up. If you haven't got it, we'll make sure it's available. Again, it's pull. You have to go and find it rather than be given it, which is the wrong way round. And you can see in question 41, we've actually asked again for the range per class, and they have passed it on to Clifford Chance, and hopefully they're going to get something, and it's going to come to us in sometime in the future. So the investor advocate, as I said, he's going to be at the court. We asked him about that. We're holding a symposium now. He was asked to come, as you can see here. He says he deals with general inquiries. It would therefore be inappropriate for him as the investor advocate to attend such an event. I'll leave that to your own view and what you think about that. He could have at least been here to listen to what was going on, but as Andy said, he will get a copy of this. Again, it's about the future creditors, where we're going to get information going forward, how we're going to get it. Is it going to be actually Are they going to do the pros and cons? And what they're saying here is they have some concerns. He has some concerns about the documentation, and he's raised questions to Clifford Chance about this. And he said his report will summarise the investor advocate's findings. It would be interesting if we get sight of that report before he submits it. I doubt it very much. As you can see here, all the responses we got for the first set of questions about the investor committee, we were told basically they would go to Clifford Chance. The response back has been, don't contact them, they're nothing to do with you, basically. Then we asked him who's representing the private investors. Basically, he is. But as you'll see further down, we are going to be able to go there. He will submit a report. We've already mentioned that. What we also asked him if there was going to be any, from a court's perspective, if there are only 20,000 or 50,000 votes or whatever, does that mean it's a credible vote statistically? And as you can see there, he says the number of scheme creditors is therefore only a factor of the court's decision about making the process. For that reason, there's no threshold. So, you know, we can have a poor turnout of number of investors, but it still goes through. Now, we did ask him about, can we as investors or attend? He's actually said investors are able to attend. They aren't limited. They think that it's going to be at the Rolls building in London. But they're saying that typical for these sort of courts, the time and place won't be available to the afternoon before. So on the afternoon of the 9th of October, they will release where it's going to be and at what time. So if anybody wants to travel, it's going to be very difficult on that side of things. He also says the normal process is to have a barrister, but he said at the bottom there, however, if anyone we are dealing with does want to appear in court without a barrister, please could he let him know, and he'll mention his report to the court. And he'll also pass the details on to Clifford Chance and may bring it to the court's attention. So if you do want to go, it sounds like we can. We've already talked about one thing we don't know is how are they going to identify bona fide investors? They've already admitted that the names of who own the shares, like myself, are with our platforms. So how are they going to get at those? Also, in question 33, Mark's already mentioned this. Is there going to be weighting between private investors and institutional investors? And they've already said that we'll get a vote and be based on how much our shares were worth. Again, we've raised a bit about institutional shares, that a lot of retail customers or private investors have institutional shares. They have raised these different interests with Clifford Chance. Whether or not that will have any credence with them, we wait to see. The next question, we talk about how many retail investors really are there. Nobody seems to know the exact number, even to the nearest 50,000 would be nice. So we've asked him to actually find out what it is and make sure that it is in his report, because it's fair and equitable as the investor advocate to inform the court of how many retail investors there really are, rather than if you just look at the shares, it looks like there's only about 0.5% to 1% of all the shares that are held by retail investors, which is totally not true. If he's not willing to put in his report, we've asked him why. We've also asked why there isn't two votes, one for retail investors and one for institutional investors. And on the right-hand side there, you can see that basically it's a load of blurb that's saying that Link Fund Solutions believe it's best that it's a single vote. Lastly, I found this really outstanding, that Hargreaves Lansdown, as a company for their multi-manager funds and for their investors that have used their platform, hold a staggering 29.73% of the whole of the Woodford Fund. which is a massive block of votes, and we want to make sure that it's correctly dealt with and split out between the retail investors and the institutional investors. And he said the court will consider whether the scheme is fair in terms of how that is split. Right, as I mentioned, the questions and answers we've got so far will be sent out. We may also be sending out other documentation because they referred to that. I think it's very important that Joseph Banner, if you've got feedback on the scheme, please let him know what they are. The more people that go to Joseph Banner and say whatever they feel about this, as long as it's about the scheme process and what has been happening, then he needs to know. And then he will hopefully pull that all together and put it in his report. My apologies, that's been rather quick. There's a lot to go through there. As I say, you will find, if you look through it tomorrow or at the weekend, there's plenty of information there. Okay, Andy, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. I know, as does Mark and Neil and others, Linda and so on, I know that you've put a huge amount of time and effort into preparing your presentation tonight. It was very difficult and challenging to get all those questions to the investor advocate, to get the responses down into your slides. I think everybody's going to be very keen to show their appreciation for what you've done. The sound quality was a problem, but we could just about make out what you were saying. And of course, because we're going to be circulating the recording, people can always go back over it if they need to make sure they heard every word that they needed to. So can we please do two things? First of all, thank Alan for his session just now, but also welcome to the microphone, Mr. Mark Northway. So Alan, thank you very, very much indeed. Mark, over to you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. And after Mark, we'll have a bit of a Q&A. We're also going to get some thoughts from Marty and from Neil Taylor. Mark Northway, over to you. Thank you. Folks, we've known Mark for years and years and years. Mark's part of Better Finance as well as part of ShareSoc. Better Finance is the pan-European investor advocacy group. Transparency Task Force is a member. Mark's organisation, ShareSoc, is a member as well. And Mark's somebody else that we hold in very high esteem in terms of his technical knowledge and insights. And I'm very, very keen to hear what Mark's about to say. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So mine will probably be a little shorter than the others. I'm a director of ShareSoc. ShareSoc is an organisation that membership organisation for individual investors that has really two roles. We provide member services to individual investors, and we provide a lobbying and campaigning process that looks after the interests of individual investors generally. And it's in that capacity that we look at Woodford. We have been running a Woodford campaign for a couple of years now. That campaign was fairly heavily focused on legal redress claims, and we did endorse one of the legal redress claims, which is the Lead A claim. Lead A, that claim was closed now to applicants, and therefore that endorsement has been removed. But also the world has changed around us, and so
stop it.
The decisions about whether to follow a legal redress claim have changed quite substantially, and I think it's fair to say everybody is in a bit of a wait and see mode. So I need to show this slide because effectively we're very happy to talk about our thought process, but it's not advice, and it doesn't come with any guarantee of correctness. What you get is our best understanding of what is going on and our interpretation of what is going on. So the title of this webinar was "What is Link up to?" And the primary thing I think is protecting Link, which is rational. It's looking to facilitate the transfer, and it says if, but it should be of. I don't know if I can change that on the fly. The business to Waystone, which is something that it wants to do because there is value associated in that transfer, although it will give up that value. but also because it preserves a business. And that business is quite fundamental to the functioning of the UK market. The ACV market is quite substantial and is very much dominated by Link. And there is a question as to whether or not there is anyone who can pick up the pieces if Link stops doing this. And I'm sure that that is in the minds of the regulators on the way through this. Cleaning up its liabilities, Link wants to get on with its life, and it can only do so once it's got rid of the potential liabilities surrounding this and put a cap on it, and is able to say to its shareholders it's done and dusted. In order to get those three things done, they are effectively foregoing the sale proceeds of the business, and the parent is paying £60 million in addition. And I think it's important to realise that if one sued, forgetting for a moment redress schemes, the FSCS and so on and so forth, but if we sued Link, we would have rights against, if we won that lawsuit, against Link's net asset value, LFSL's net assets, and those net assets, if there weren't a sale, would probably not be worth an awful lot, and we would not have access through the corporate veil into the parent company. So the amount of money available through a lawsuit from Link directly would be substantially less than is being discussed here. I think the bigger question, the more interesting question, perhaps, if I can figure out how to change this slide, is what the FCA is up to. And the FCA's approach to this has been quite interesting and quite unintuitive, unless one looks at a sort of slightly larger picture. And I should say that neither I nor ShareSoc are conspiracy theorists. Neither do we really share the view sometimes expressed by the Transparency Task Force that the regulator is not fit for purpose. We've been quite a constructive and supportive interlocutor with the FCA, although I must say that that position is becoming rather more difficult to hold recently. I certainly share some of the views that were expressed that there's a degree of protection of the FSCS that's going on, and we're seeing multiple evidence of that. And there's a degree of attempt to avoid the FSCS making payments when it's fairly clear that those payments are what it was set up to handle. So it's becoming a little bit concerning. But here, the focus of the FCA has been on one part of this, which is really to say, look, some clients were able to sell from a magic date, 1st of November 2018. Some clients were able to sell before anyone realised there was something wrong, before the fund was suspended, and they got a better deal. And really, Link should have been on top of it and saying, hang on a minute, they're taking out all of the quality liquid assets and they're leaving the rest behind. And you, Link, should have reacted to this earlier. And they are following a piece of logic that says, well, they got a better deal, and we can quantify that better deal, and the amount by which they got a better deal is the amount by which the remaining investors got hurt, and that logic, I think, is pretty ropey and pretty flawed. The other thing that they're doing, and it's evident in this practice letter, is they're agreeing with Link that Link breached principles, not rules, and that's quite key, because all of the legal redress processes are about breaches of FCA rules, and there appears to be a fairly subtle difference between the effect of breach of principle and breach of rules. I'm going to come on to the magic number in a second, but essentially it relates to what I was talking about. How much is the loss that we're talking about? And there are really two elements to it. One is the loss prior to suspension, and the second is the loss post-suspension, The really easy one to deal with the loss post suspension, and given that the fund was the NAV was falling up to the suspension point, realistically, if you add pre-suspension losses, they're going to be larger. But Link has come up with the FCA has come up with a magic number of 298 million being the loss that they believe that investors in WAIF have suffered. What do I think they're doing? I think they're protecting the ACD market. As I said, it's very important that this business continues. It's important from a market disruption perspective. I think they're protecting the FSCS because if we don't accept this, or if investors don't accept this, then there is a lawsuit. If that lawsuit is successful, there is a blow through to the FSCS, and that blow through will be a larger proportion. So first of all, the FCA reckons that loss is 298. So there's an incremental 50 million relative to what's going on with Link at the moment. But as I mentioned, Link is likely to be worth less in liquidation than it is in sale, and therefore that 50 million hits the FSCS increases substantially. But more importantly, I don't believe that 298 is the loss, and I think that the lawsuits are looking at substantially higher losses, which came from Paul's presentation before. So the hit to the FSCS is potentially huge here. I think they're protecting the FCA, and I think if this can be made to go away, and everyone says, oh, the FCA managed to reclaim what they claim, to restore what they claim is 77% or 78% of the losses to investors, and the market continues and everybody's happy and it's done and dusted, then I think the lens of focus on what was the FCA doing in the lead up to this catastrophe is dealt with to a degree. So I think the FCA potentially has a few interesting conflicts that it's dealing with here. And the fundamental question is, is it really looking after the interests of the individual investor here, of the consumer, or is it balancing the interests of multiple parties and coming to what it believes is a sensible outcome? And I think the answer is clear. So coming back to what is a loss, a very, very simple maths. Now that the suspension date, 3.6 billion, liquidation proceeds 2.6 billion, there's a loss of 1 billion. That is, from the suspension date, collectively, owners of WAIF have lost 1 billion relative to NAV. Now, this is a UCITS fund. You should have been able to exchange your NAV for cash in a very short period of time, daily trading, by simply submitting a redemption request. And on the date of suspension, you lost the ability to do that. On that date, without that suspension, you should have been able to get collectively 3.6 billion back. Collectively, we got 2.6, loss is 1 billion. The magic number, which is the FCA's number, is referred to actually in this letter, and it says the losses incurred by investors who continue to hold investors in the WAIF on or after, let me change, on or after the suspension date were up to 298 million. And as I say, that's simply it seems to be, I mean, they haven't really explained their logic, at least not that I can find, but it seems to be the guys who sold out previously got a better deal, and if I apply the logic of how much better deal they got, then I come to a number of 298 million. It's nonsense for two reasons. One is that it's not just the unfairness of allowing some investors out prior to the suspension date. In other words, should Link have reacted and suspended earlier, is effectively what's going on, what's being addressed here. But there's a much more fundamental question, which is being completely ignored, is what on earth was this fund doing holding the crap that it held? That is really there are questions on, was Woodford following his mandate, and what was Link doing about that? There are questions of, did he breach liquidity rules? We know he did. They were passive breaches rather than active breaches, in that it was the sales that were the redemptions that were forcing the percentages up, but nevertheless there were clear breaches. how was that managed by Link, and crucially also how was that managed by the FCA? So I think we're being sold some fairly false numbers, and I think it runs through the letter here. The loss is $1 billion. The redress that is being offered is 235 million, and as Paul says, that's 180 million plus a potential reserve fund, which if further lawsuits come against Link from investors who are not covered by this scheme, is going to get chewed up pretty quickly. So we're talking about a maximum recovery of 23%, and I think both the FCA's language about this and the Link Financial Solutions language about this is misleading in the extreme. Is it fair? So I think you have to look at it in terms of what Link's proposing. So Link has done something allegedly. The FCA is saying that there's a damage that they have to pay, which is 300 odd million. Link can walk away and collapse their subsidiary, and we will get an awful lot, or investors will get an awful lot less than the 300 million, and it can let this fall on the FSCS. What Link has proposed is to say, well, actually, we'll sell the company, we'll give you the whole proceeds, and we'll give you an additional 60 million, effectively ex gratia, from our parent company. So I think one has to say that is a reasonable approach by Link, and the Link is going above and beyond what it is legally required to do here. Nevertheless, it only covers around 23% of investor losses. Those losses stem from misbehavior, not from investment decisions. This is another point that the FCA has made, which is that the FSCS doesn't cover investment losses. In other words, if investors went with a manager, the manager made poor decisions, those poor decisions resulted in a loss, that is absolutely the risk that an investor takes, and that is absolutely not what the FSCS is here to cover. But here, there is behavior that is outside the mandate, that is outside the rules, and that has directly led to an investment loss that investor should not have expected under the mandate that they gave to Woodford. That is what the FSCS is there to cover. So I think the answer is, from an investor perspective, it doesn't seem like a fair outcome. There's $1 billion that's been lost. That $1 billion should be covered by a combination of Link and FSCS. What's being proposed is that 23% of it is covered, and the FSCS sort of hides under a table. Just thinking about is it an investment loss for a second? It's just worth thinking about what the markets have done in the meantime. So on the left-hand end of this scale, you've got the 2019 share market. Then we're looking here at the FTSE All Share, and you can see what happened in the pandemic, but you can also see the average post that in which this fund has been liquidated. And what I don't see there is a market that justifies a 30% loss of value in a liquidation. Being a bit more generous to Link and saying, well, let's have a look at FTSE, the FTSE. Then yes, there is a degree of loss, but there's also, if you look at the average, there's also been a degree of outperformance, and there's certainly been the opportunity to recoup, to liquidate into AIM type shares, which is probably lower quality shares than one would expect to have seen in an equity income fund. And then finally, Miton, which is micro shares, which, as everybody knows, has been in the wars recently, let's say. Nevertheless, there's never really been a point except for March 2020, when it was below the point at suspension. So there's no market reason. I'm going to stop sharing now. There's no market excuse. There's no market reason why the investors should have taken a loss because there is a sort of suggestion, oh, your shares have underperformed. They've underperformed because they were rubbish, and they've underperformed because they were hurt by the overhang of a forced sale of 3.6 billion of illiquid assets. So the loss that's been taken is directly a function of the misbehaviour and the subsequent suspension. That's a longer than I was expecting to talk, but so I think the simple answer is not fair, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not the least worst outcome. The decision process that investors have to go through is separate from saying, is it fair?
Mark Northway, thank you very much indeed. Folks, in a moment, we're going to hear from Martin Farrimond for just a couple of minutes, just 1 or 2 minutes, please, Martin. And then Neil Taylor, the same, 1 or 2 minutes. And then we'll be opening up for general Q&A. The formal presentation as such will end at about, excuse me, will end at about 7:30, but I'm happy to keep this channel open until about 8. We will continue the recording, so it's kind of a live recording, as it were. I'm happy to keep things going until about 8 o'clock if folks want to continue to ask questions and make comments. So can we, first of all, thank Mark Northway, whilst also inviting our next contributor, Martin Farrimond, to the microphone. Thank you very much, Mark. Appreciate that, and appreciate the preparation into your slides. Okay, we're covering a lot of ground now. I'm really pleased with the comment that Mark Northway just made about the language the FCA and Link are using is misleading in the extreme. I think that sums the whole thing up perfectly well, and it should not be like that. We should not have a regulator involved with any kind of misleading information at all. The entire financial services sector relies on being trustworthy and for people to have confidence in it. How can you have trust and confidence in the financial sector if you cannot have confidence in the integrity of the conduct regulator? It's absolutely unacceptable. Martin Farrimond, please, 1 or 2 minutes tops. Thank you.
Okay, look, I don't have an awful lot more to add, really. I guess I come to this as, like a lot of the people on this call, as one of the retail investors that lost a lot of money through this fund. I think where my thinking at the moment is you know, it's a lousy deal that's being offered to us through this deal. But my question is really more one of, you know, if it's rejected, and there's a number of things I've taken from this that I need to be doing to make sure I get my say in terms of voting on this deal. The thing is, if it's rejected, will we get anything better, or is this as good as it's going to get? And I guess in that regard, I guess from my perspective, the law firms are very quiet. I'm in the RGL claim, and I had a lot of communication from them, you know, at the end of last year. But it's gone very quiet, and haven't really heard anything from them. And they're going to be the people we rely on if this gets rejected and gets pursued through litigation. And I'm pretty unclear as to, if we reject the small morsels that this would throw at us to cover a fraction of our losses, is what's is anything better going to be achieved? And that's really where my thinking is at the moment.
Martin, thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts. We're going to go to Neil Taylor. I see that Mark Bishop's raised his hand. He probably wants to come back to that, on that point about lawyers, I think. But let's go to Neil Taylor first, and then we'll go back to Mark Bishop. Neil.
Yeah, hello everyone. There's not a lot I want to say as well on top of everything that's been covered. But one of the things that I'm really anxious about is that when everybody votes as an individual private investor, because most of the people who invested in this the direct investors, you know, the people who put money in, should really make a vote and vote themselves, and don't let the providers do that, because it just shows with the recent incidents that I picked up earlier that you've got to vote and have that vote and make that vote clear. I had an experience of this with Serious Minerals. I don't know if you know the company. It was a Lancashire development, and I wanted to vote on that share because they were going to sell the company for pennies to Anglo American, and I wanted to vote on that. So I spoke to Hargreaves Lansdown, who I use as a provider, and they spoke with Link and said, Mr. Taylor would like to vote directly, and they allowed that. And Link wrote to me, give me a letter saying this. It took a long time, and then they give you an access code and to do the vote, make the vote. But it does take a long time to get this information through. So if you're going to do it, I suspect they're going to use the same systems for all of us lot. So, and that's a big number of people that might want to vote directly on this one, because it's got a high public interest concern, and people have got their own opinions, whether they're going to vote for or against or abstain, whatever. So just be aware that it does take time to get them to change their minds or allow you to do it. The other thing I wanted to pick up on is, and Alan picked it up earlier, the NAV of the fund as at the 31st of March, just because the accounts have been produced for the fund by Linked Fund Solutions, is 34.5 million, which is, again, another drop. We all know that. But it's just worth pointing out, giving an example of one drop, which is Benevolent AI, for instance. That's valued at the moment at 9.5 million. As at the 30th of June 2019, it was valued by Linked Fund Solutions at 174.6 million. It's now 9.5. So there's an example of the junk that we've invested in via Neil Woodford. Another one is Rutherford Health. Was valued at 63.3 in June 2019. It's now nil. It's gone into administration. Plus, they put another £45 million into it since the suspension. So you can see where this has gone horribly wrong. The junk bonds that they were buying, junk information. The capital losses are huge, absolutely huge. And you can't say that is all down to Linked Fund Solutions. It's not. It's a combination of things. But ultimately, they're responsible for managing Woodford and what he does and what he's done. And they failed to do that. So we have to make our own decision whether this is good or bad, this offer. I think it's bad, to be honest, and we've been let down by a lot of people. So I really want to vote on this, even if others don't. But I think it's an important thing to make a decision on yourself. That's all I want to say.
Neil, thank you very much indeed. Folks, I'm going to spend a moment just very briefly covering the simple, harsh reality that the Transparency Task Force lives, survives, doesn't thrive, but survives on a model which is a combination of contributions, regular monthly contributions that some people make, and also donations. I put a link into the chat earlier to our donations page. Please understand, we made this event available completely free of charge for people. There's no compulsion, don't misunderstand me. You do not have to make a donation. If you don't want to, that's entirely up to you. All I'm saying is it would help. We've incurred some direct costs in actually running this, including, by the way, the survey processing, but that's another matter. So please make a donation if you can. You'll see the link in the chat. Can we sort of formally bring the session to an end there before we go to Mark Bishop and Paul Kiley, then others that may want to ask questions? So can we once again put our hands together to thank all the people that contributed tonight? A lot of people have put in a huge amount of time, particularly Alan Pyatt, who spent a lot of time over the last few days getting his slides together, getting those questions sorted out, etc. So for Sunil, for Paul, for Alan, for Neil, for Marty, for Mark Northway, for everybody that's spoken today, thank you very much indeed. You've all gone above and beyond to try to share the information that you've been able to get across today. And you're all motivated by a sense of wanting to make sure that people aren't getting shafted in plain English. And the concern, of course, is that maybe that's exactly what's happening right now. My personal view is we should not tolerate the idea that the regulator could or is involved with any kind of misleading information. That's just absolutely no way. We do not live in a banana republic. This is the United Kingdom. And it ain't good enough if the FCA is deliberately keeping quiet about alternatives that could be better off for people within the current rules and regulations. If the FSCS exists to do this kind of thing, then it's not right that people are denied the chance of knowing about that because the FCA is failing to be open and honest about it. So thanks all very much indeed. We are continuing to record We'll go to Mark Bishop, then to Paul Carlier. I've got a feeling we may be hearing some very interesting comments and questions. Mark, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Andy, and thanks to everybody who's been involved, particularly Alan Pyatt, who's done a remarkable amount of work liaising with the investor advocate and processing the very large number of responses, seeking clarification of some of them. I do think that there is an interesting point here raised by Martin, and it's probably in a way one of the most important points. I don't see how you can vote on this scheme of arrangement, because in law, the point of a scheme of arrangement is to put a proposal to the creditors of a company that they should accept less than 100 pence in the pound against the sum they're owed, because it's in their interests to do so. That's what a scheme of arrangement vote is about. And you cannot have a meaningful scheme of arrangement vote unless you know about the counterfactual, in other words, about the alternative to the deal that's on the table. Now, the document that's in front of you, which is not the scheme of arrangement vote paperwork, it's a prelude to it. It's basically, talking about what they're going to put in front of the court on the 10th. It omits the most obvious counterfactual, which is a restitution order sought by the FCA for the full extent of either the gated investors' losses or all investors' losses, knowing full well that Link is not good for the money, but that the FSCS is. Now, it may well be, I don't know, that there are very good reasons why the FCA believes that it would be unsuccessful in making such an application. Alternatively, it may have assessed the probability of success at X or Y%. How can you vote on accepting the proposal that's in front of you unless you know how likely it is that that deal will go ahead? You would ideally also want to know how long it would take to go ahead. Actually, how long it would take to go ahead largely depends on whether the firm accepts it or resists it. And clearly, given the amount of evidence against the firm and the fact that it's already at the table making offers, makes it look as though the probability of it fighting it is fairly low. But that's conjecture, it's not fact. Until there is a fair assessment made by the FCA of the counterfactual, and that is placed in the public domain, so you can decide on what you want to accept, I can't see how you can vote on a scheme of arrangement, because the two alternatives in front of you are the extremes. They are, on one hand, the proposal from Link, and on the other hand, litigation. Litigation could take a long time. We don't know how the FSCS would take the liability, because actually it might want to contest the liability as if it were the firm itself. It's not like a liability that's been handed down to restitution order by the FCA. Also, there's the chunk of money being taken out by the law firms. There is big uncertainty attached to it. There would be potentially less uncertainty attached to the restitution order, but you've got literally no information about it. And in that email that I received this afternoon, which I read out for you, it says the alternative is, litigation. It's as though the other alternative, restitution order, doesn't exist. So if I was, and I hope we're going to be sending this video, I think we are, to the FCA, my message to them is, you've got to start talking about the restitution order. If you've got a damn good reason why you don't think you can do it, tell us what that reason is so we know. If you haven't, then you've got to talk about it, timescales, probabilities, quantum, so that people can make a fair decision.
Well said, Mark. Very, very well, very, very, very well said. The more I think about it, the more angry I'm getting about this. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Mr. Paul Carlier. You're on mute, Paul.
There's a few issues here. Neil touched upon it just now. It's called the proxy, where I've, in the past, when I buy shares for a share dealing platform like Halifax, you are essentially you're under the banner of the institution, but you can apply for a proxy, and which is what Neil was mentioning. And it shouldn't take as long as as it took in that case, because I got one within 2 days. I had shares in Lloyd's Banking Group, funnily enough, so as to be able to attend, and I got the proxy within 48 hours, I was able to attend, I was able to ask questions, and I was able to vote on any of the issues. So again, that might open up the door for people who are currently classified as institutional investors. But as Neil says, you want to do that quickly. I'm unsure how you can be bound to a deal when you have so little information disclosed to you as to what went wrong, why, and who was liable. Because at the end of the day, the alternative isn't just that maybe there's a case against Link. There could be cases against others, and you're being asked to agree a deal without knowing all of these facts. There's a very disturbing similar case. It's that the FCA put forward in 2017. It's called a mortgage redress scheme for Lloyds Bank mortgage customers. There's a £300 million scheme, which sounds a lot. You know, that's quite a lot for 529,000 victims, and they got everyone to agree to it. Lloyds administered the payments, and it was only in 2020 that the FCA published a final notice that revealed a whole host of wrongdoing that would have given all the victims actions and rights of actions to go after them for greater losses. I mean, it just has all the same hallmarks here. So I find that really disturbing. When I'd like to ask Neil Taylor, who mentioned some of these other values, because what these shares were worth in these illiquid assets were worth at various times. Because since this happened, my big question, and I've asked the FCA, I've raised it wherever possible, is there's a massive flag here that his stake, the portion of the fund that was that was in these illiquid investments was almost double what it, or approximately double what it should have been. Now, the concern here is why? Why would you so knowingly break the rules? And there's, as a former trader, there's a way in which you can manipulate your P&L, and that is you understand where what are the timeframes for your marks, where the revals, where your portfolio or your position is going to be revaled, and that's where that's going to reflect your P&L, and often obviously will determine what your bonus is at the end of the year. Now, if you buy an illiquid, if you're having a tough year, if you then choose to buy a shed load of illiquid stock a pound, you do a deal to buy a load of it for £1. Well, and it doesn't ever trade, and obviously a lot of these stocks never traded. A couple of days prior to the mark, or where your P&L is going to be benchmarked, you do a wash trade through a broker, where you do, it's just a wash trade is an in and out trade where it changes hands and then comes back again. But the rate, you put it through a rate at £1.25, right? You chuck the broker a nice chunk of change in terms of brokerage, but you've now established a mark that you then get passed to Link that establishes a 25% return on that particular stock. And you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again, and you're inflating all of your P&L. And when you're considering a lot of these funds, they work on a 2 and 20 basis. I don't know what the terms of this were, where 2% management fee, 20% performance fee. Was that the reason that there was so much in illiquid stocks? Because you can massively manipulate. And what Neil just said there, that's the first indication I've got. I mean, it's been a flag for me from day one, and that flag's not been addressed. Nowhere do you see the FCA trying to get to the bottom of why. And that concerns me. Mark will be aware with Connell, and Premier FX is another one, where the FCA has sought to rather broker a deal rather than get to the bottom of the why. And in this case, for me, there are serious flags here, and it involves these marks. And from what Neil said, these valuations in 2019, who was making the valuations? Link was relying upon something. Were they relying upon marks that were generated by wash trades or others? So that's a real concern. Mark, you want to come in? Do you want to?
Yeah, sorry, I just want to say, of course, what we've got here is two types of small cap. One type is listed small caps, where they're illiquid and wash trades could easily be used to gain valuations. But what we've also got is a lot of unlisted stock, early stage things that are mostly held by venture capital funds of one sort or another. And the beauty of those is that they are the easiest things to gain in terms of valuation. So what happens is, let's say that we launch a biotech firm, you, me, and Andy. right? We've put in 10 million quid. We know that in 6 months' time, it's going to need another 20 million quid. As long as we're the only investors, it doesn't matter at all to any of us what the valuation is at the next round, because if we invest in proportion, we're not going to get diluted. So hey presto, instead of it being worth 10 million quid, the cash that we put in last time, we say it's now worth 100 million quid. Amazing, tenfold return in our investment funds within a few months. So I believe that a lot of that has happened. And one of the things that makes me think that's happened is if you look at how particularly the Patient Capital Trust was governed, the people who sat on that board, I think with one possible exception, were either from portfolio companies or they were from fund managers that invest in portfolio companies. So effectively what was happening was within his world, he had this network of people who all had the same economic interest as he did in being able to demonstrate that those stocks had kept going up in value.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We're going to open things up, folks, for others that want to come in with comments and questions. So particularly those that haven't yet had a chance to make a point or ask a question, please do so. Just wave a hand at me if you want to come in now, either digitally or literally wave something at me. Otherwise, we'll start bringing our sessions.
Hello.
William, I think you'll want to speak, don't you, William? Yes, please do. William, why don't you introduce yourself and share your thought? Thank you.
Well, I'm William Wormold. I was an investor through Hargreaves and Lansdowne into the Woodford Equity Fund. Obviously, I suffered as much as anybody else. I did invest £25,000. My question is, in the early days, I seem to remember that the Kent County Council had invested a vast sum of money, the residents' money, in the Woodford Equity Fund. Now, Kent County Council are being awfully quiet about it. I wonder if anybody has heard anything and what Kent County Council are doing.
What an interesting question, William. I think you're right. That is a quite really curious question. Does anybody have any comments on that? Does anybody know anything or would like to share some possibilities if it's not known?
Well, all we know is, isn't it Kent County Council that actually started the ball rolling? They wanted the £250 million back, and he didn't have the money, and that's when it all started. That was the catalyst that started the actual ball rolling and it being gated. What they're doing now, God only knows. And are they on behalf of their pensioners, going to accept 4 to 5p in the pound? Don't know.
I wonder if a quiet deal has been done. Who knows? William, thank you for your question. If anybody else has a comment on that, please whack it into the chat. Would anybody else like to come in? Again, I'm looking around on gallery view for. Oh, I think I can see a hand up there, but I can't see who it is. Bear with me a second. Beryl, hi Beryl. Please do share your thoughts. Take yourself off mute, and so you need to unmute first of all, Beryl. Then make your point. There we go. Thank you. Well done.
Hi. Well, I'm Beryl. I've been an investor since 17. I lost 35,000. I've come to the point where I don't really care what happens now. I'm totally confused with everybody's answers and everybody's reasons. I thought there might be a census of opinion here that would give me some indication of which way I should vote or not vote, but it doesn't seem to be that doesn't seem to be happening. I want to say yes, because of course I would like to get some of my money back, but if I get a pittance, I'd rather wait maybe for the solicitors to do their job. But whatever happens, I don't think any of us are going that far forward, to be fair. I don't know.
I think you're right, Beryl. I think you've just given us a very real assessment of where we are. There's uncertainty in every direction. I think this speaks to the point Mark was saying, that how can you be asked to make a decision on the situation when you know you haven't got the full picture? It's just irrational. It's not scientific, it's not logical, it's frankly unfair that people like you, Beryl, have been put in this situation.
Yeah.
And there's a horrible, horrible feeling that the priority from the regulator is to save its own face and not make it clear that there is the financial services compensation scheme, which is a piece of our investment landscape that's been there for years, that's there for these very, very reasons. Beryl, I absolutely sympathise with how you feel, but I think how you feel reflects the reality of the situation. That's why these questions are being asked of both the FCA and of the investor advocate. Mark's managing the FCA questions, Alan's managing the investor advocate questions. That's why those questions and the answers we get are so, so important. And if it becomes very, very clear, Beryl, that the investors are being treated unfairly and wrongly and not in keeping with the way things are supposed to work, then TTF will stand up and do whatever we can to draw attention to that. And that's part of what this night session is all about.
Okay, that would be helpful. Yeah.
We'll do what we can, Beryl.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Alan Pyatt, back to you, sir.
Yeah, I know we're drawing to a close now, and it's just a thought and potential scenario. So let's say the vote doesn't get through, okay, and they hit the sandbags. Then it's either litigation with Lee Day, RGL, and Harkus Parker, or the FCA have had 4 years in investigations. They must know what the hell's been going on, yeah, or they must have a view on it. They don't want that to get in the public domain, potentially, because it'll investor confidence with the market will take a long time to recover. It could have negative impacts. So it doesn't want to go to court. So I'm wondering what Mark Fisher's view would be about the FCA saying, okay, that's failed. Round the back door, give us the 230 million. We'll stick that into the financial services compensation scheme, yeah, to bolster up the money we're going to pay out. They'll drag it out, but my view is I don't think the FCA want this to go to court because they can't afford it to.
I think you're right. I think there's been a very, I think there's been a very deliberate attempt to stop the full truth about what's really happened getting out there. And as you say, after 4 years, Mark Bishop.
I probably should clarify. I mean, I'll stress I'm not a lawyer, but this is my understanding about how things will work. If the FCA were to go down the route of restitution order against Link Fund Solutions, Link would have to pay out the sum of money that the FCA ordered it to pay to the people that the FCA ordered it to pay the money to the extent that it was able. So all of the money in the business will be sucked up, given to you guys. All of the money in the professional indemnity insurance, the same. So the 180 million quid basically would be yours. You wouldn't get the 60 million quid. That is a theoretical contribution from the parent. But of course, that's not really 60 million quid because it's going to pay for sale costs, liabilities of Link Fund Solutions, cost of fighting litigation from the investors that weren't gated. You might get 10 million or you might get 50 million. We don't know, somewhere in the middle, probably. So maybe a few couple of tens of millions of pounds you wouldn't get, but you would get the shortfall made good by the FSCS for all eligible investors and up to 85k per person. So for most people, I think probably people who've got less than about £800,000 in the fund, potentially you'd be better off. But I say potentially because it would depend on the scale of the restitution order that the FCA was prepared to get against the firm. And the problem with this, we keep coming around to it, is we don't know because the FCA is pretending this option doesn't exist. Literally in the email today, it doesn't mention it. It says the only option is litigation if you don't go for this offer, which is not true. It's maybe that they don't like the other option. There's a reason why they can't do it, but they should set that out if that is the case. So it's a mess, really. I mean, there isn't any way that people can kind of donate to the FSCS. You can't. FCA can do a deal with the FCA, so with Link, whereby Link would put the money into there as effectively as that they would be giving it to you. So that's really the answer to the question technically. But it all comes down to the same thing, which is you're not having all of the options and all of the facts set in front of you at this point, which I think makes it difficult to make an informed decision.
Thank you, Mark. Can you answer 2 questions for me, Mark? So the second question is, can you just remind me how you got to that 800k figure? You explained it earlier. I think others might also appreciate how you got to that 800k figure. That's the second question, okay? The first question is, Mark, am I right in thinking that when these good folk invested into Woodford, they did so cognizant of the fact that there was a financial services compensation scheme that worked the way that it worked, and on that basis, it is morally wrong for them to effectively have that not be made available, given what has happened? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so the first one is, how do I get to a figure of about 800,000? And that's because at the moment, the deal you're being given, if you're generous towards it, is a bit more or less than 10 pence in the pound. So I've said, if you had, 800 and something thousand pounds in the fund and you get 10 pence in the pound, you're going to get about the 85k. So it's only the really, really huge investors. If you had 50 million in there, then clearly you're better off getting 10 pence in the pound at the most, if you're being generous, than you would 85k. So it's some theoretical, really large private investors, there may be a handful of them, would be better off not going down the FSCS route. As far as the other question is concerned, of course, when people invested, they understood, or likely to have understood, that the FSCS was available to them. And to give the FCA its credit, it is saying the FSCS may be available to you, but it's only saying that in the context of a litigation that succeeds. It's not saying it in the case of a restitution order obtained by the FCA. So one of the routes by which you would get to the FSCS, the one that doesn't cost you any money, because you don't have to pay in a way any percentage of what you're paid to the litigation funders and the lawyers, and the only one that doesn't involve you giving up any contractual rights, because you don't have to sign away your rights to litigate against people, or any of that kind of thing. That only option, that really attractive option, theoretically, nobody's talking about it. It's as though it doesn't exist. That's why I think it's, at the moment, is effectively like it's a dysfunctional voting process, because you're being deprived of information about the counterfactual.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Remarkably interesting stuff. Mr. Mark Northway, back to you, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Mark Bishop, if you're thinking about a restitution order, are you thinking about that for 298 million, or are you thinking about that for a bigger amount?
Well, this is the question, really, isn't it? How can you make a decision when you don't know? They may have a very good reason why they are absolutely confident that they couldn't get a restitution order for any amount of money, or they may have really good cases opinion that they would only get it for a tiny sum. I must say, I listened to Mark Northway's presentation, and I put instantly in the chat, he's basically asked the big money question, which is, what about the losses that were caused by malinvestment? Because the sum you're being offered at the moment is solely in respect of the lack of liquidity of your holdings compared with the liquidity that was enjoyed by a hypothetical investor who left instantly or immediately before the fund was gated. That person, because they were not held in the fund, didn't suffer a loss of value of the holdings after gating. That is the only bit that they're compensating you for at the moment, or proposing to compensate you for at the moment. There is also the question of what you lost, because an equity income fund went and invested in a load of early stage businesses, many of them unlisted, that not only were not throwing off income, but they were actually consuming cash. The subscribers, the shareholders, were expected every few months to put cash into the business so it could continue to survive and grow. That is the opposite of what a reasonable person would expect for an equity income fund. The percentage of unlisted stocks was higher than it should have been. The amount of gearing was higher than it should have been. Any number of things were wrong with how this fund was operated. There were also, and this is a kind of dirty secret of the thing, there were a number of undisclosed potential conflicts of interest, connected party transactions and the thing. There was a lot that was not as it should have been about how your money was invested. And nobody is at all talking about any compensation for that at this stage. Now, there is a theory I had when this thing was first mooted, which is that the FCA would announce the results of its investigation into Woodford Investment Management. And it would say, Woodford Investment Management went and invested in a load of old rubbish on your behalf, shouldn't have done that. We are issuing a restitution order against that firm. for this many million, in fact, probably £1 billion, and that will go to the FSCS. If they'd have done that, and at the same time or afterwards, they'd have said, and here's a few quid from the authorised corporate director, I think that would have made sense. And people probably would have accepted the few quid from the ACD under those circumstances. It may even be that the FCA in 6 months or a year's time will come up with an announcement about a bumper deal to do with Woodford. But you've got to say the problem with Woodford is the same as the one with Link, which is the FCA's own fingers are all over it. And if you've read, for example, Owen Walker's book about the Woodford Equity Income Fund, you know how many errors the FCA made in authorising, Neil himself, after what he did at Invesco Perpetual, Newman, I've forgotten his first name, Craig is at Newman, who was the MD. He literally is accused of stealing client data from Invesco and was sacked, and yet he was authorised into a control function in this new business, an accelerated kind of authorisation process designed to help them. It is perverted what happened, and perhaps the FCA, for those reasons, feels that it's not as able to assert itself as it might otherwise be.
Well, thank you very, very
Sorry,
much.
can I just come back on that slightly?
Yeah, go on, and then we go to Paul Farley. Go on, what?
Yeah, your issue is that the if you're looking for, so if you're saying this isn't adequate, we want a restitution order, your counterparty for that discussion is the FCA, and the FCA believes that the loss is 298 million. So the incremental value of a restitution order that the FCA is going to agree to, assuming they agree to that route, is only 50 million. And in the big scale of things, if one is looking at certainty of outcome, 235 million, or long-term discussions with the FCA and who knows how we get 298 million. If you're looking at an incremental 50 million against $1 billion for that uncertainty, then I think the choices become quite clear. What I don't understand is, what I don't see is how you change the discussion, the FCA's view, to say, well, actually the losses are more like what the losses clearly are. And I think there's a transparency issue here. The FCA should be crystal clear on why it thinks that 298 is the FCA total amount, is the loss, and why it feels that there is no further claim on any party for the wrongdoing in terms of the way the portfolio was constructed and managed.
I agree. I mean, one thing I would say is that I don't think they've said that there is no claim against any other party, and their investigation in theory against Woodford Investment Management is ongoing, and it's theoretically possible that it may result in a pot of gold for investors.
But then a statement to say that there is an alternative route that backs this up, but that's not really the way, certainly not the way that Therese Chambers' discussion has been going. She's kind of saying the FSCS is not there to cover investment losses, and investors should take what's on the table here. There's no hint of a follow-up. I know she says that they're investigating other parties, but there's no suggestion that that's going to result in a. I mean, because Woodford, let's face it, if one assumes that 235 million comes from this, and one accepts that there's a further loss behind it, if that loss were claimed from Woodford, Woodford would definitely fail, and the entire amount there would fall on the FSCS pocket purse. I don't see any hint that they're thinking about that.
No, exactly. The thing is that they would say it's all confidential, we can't talk about it, etc., etc. But it does also come down to the sequencing, which is the FCA, for reasons we might speculate about, sees it as being a good thing to facilitate the sale of Link Fund Solutions to Waystone Group. Personally, I can't see how that's in consumers' interests, but there is a counter argument that actually, the ACD market would be in some level of turmoil if you took Link out of it because of insolvency. So it probably feels that it's the right thing to do to transfer that business on, and perhaps therefore it's really the reason why it's set the figure at 290 million is because the sum it can get to using the firm's cash, its professional indemnity insurance, and the sale proceeds is within touching distance of that figure, it can claim 77%, and therefore it thinks it's got a chance of getting it through. If it said to us that the loss was 1 billion, everyone would be laughing at 180 to 235 million. So, being cynical about it, it's not necessarily because it doesn't believe that there were further losses, or maybe it believes there were further losses, but it believes that those losses should first be paid by another party, such as Woodford Investment Management, or realistically the FSCS on its behalf. There's so much we don't know about this stuff.
And that's the bit I struggle with, because the ACD is overseeing the management of the fund, which was the direct management was Woodford. But to the extent that they oversaw the liquidity, they also oversaw the portfolio construction, and they also oversaw the percentages that were in illiquid assets, and they also oversaw the marks and so on.
Exactly.
So I can't see that you can take an approach that says Link is only responsible for the late suspension, effectively, is what I interpret this process as.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, I've taken too much time.
Yeah, General, can I cut across there? But we're all falling into a trap here. The trap is the narrative is only talking about post-suspension.
Yes.
And that is only a tip of an iceberg. It's the bit below the iceberg as well about what happened pre-gating and all the things that Woodford and Link didn't do or did do, that caused it. So it's a big 2-3 billion rather than 1 billion. So we're getting a bit narrow from my perspective.
We'll hear Mark's point on that. We're then going to go to Paul Carlier. Then we must ask David about a profoundly interesting point he just put in the chat. David's put the potential backers of the FSCS threatened to withdraw financial support because of the exorbitant amount of times that Andy Bailey messed up. We'll come to that point. That's a really, really interesting point to be put in the chat. Mark, finish off what you're about to say. We'll go to Paul Carley, then we'll go to David's point in the chat. Thank you.
Maybe I'll deal with David's point as well, if that's okay. So just to go back to what Mark Northway said, absolutely right, yes. And the same thing to what Neil said, which is the responsibility of the ACD was to oversee portfolio construction. One of the most harrowing for me details about how Woodford Investment Management operated is that Neil Woodford had acquired a much younger wife who had a love of horses, and he then decided to share that love of horses. So they built a secure app for him so that he could buy and sell shares while riding his horse. Now, what kind of oversight and supervision is the ACD providing, unless it's riding alongside him in that process? It's ridiculous. So I feel absolutely sure that, as Neil said, you've got to also look at the losses that happened during the life of the fund. To what David said, I'm not sure I entirely agree with you. It is the case that many of the firms that contribute to the FSCS are uncomfortable with paying that levy. And for many years, they have called it the regulatory failure tax, because most of the losses that occur there happen because of failure of the regulators. But they have no choice but to pay it. The idea that they could decide not to withdraw financial support does not exist, because if they do not want to pay that levy, they are not able to be authorised to provide financial services within the regulatory perimeter in the UK. You wouldn't get Lloyd's Banking Group saying, terribly sorry, I've had enough of paying the FSCS levy, nor the IFA at the end of your street. It's not an option. They don't like paying it. And what actually happens is whenever it goes up, they go to MPs and they knock on the door of the city minister and they say, this levy is getting out of control. Please try and fix the FCA.
Mark, is it conceivable? We'll get to Paul Carley in a second. Thanks for your patience, Paul. Is it conceivable, Mark Bishop, that a group of big heavyweight industry players, banks, asset managers, etc., this is pure conjecture on my part, had a meeting with the Treasury and said, this is ridiculous. The amount of regulatory failure tax we're having to pay is totally unacceptable. We are going to relocate to Singapore. We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Unless you, for goodness sake, get on top of this and stop us having to pay out so much money. And by the way, if you think we're going to be happy to pay the bill for Woodford, we're not going to do it. Is it conceivable that industry could have put that kind of pressure on them? No?
Sadly not. I'll explain to you why. The levy is divided by type of firm. This is as I understand it. So, for example, if a bank was to go into default, then other banks might see their levy go up. But banks are big. and they would be rescued by the taxpayer in any case if they went under. So the really big firms that would matter to the Treasury if they threatened to leave the country, they are not paying a ridiculous level of FSCS levy because the firms in their sector don't become insolvent. The problem is the little IFA at the end of the street, because all of the time IFAs go under. You think of things like the British Steel Pension Scheme fiasco, where IFAs would descend into Port Talbot, where a load of steel workers who are not financially sophisticated have got defined benefit pension schemes and are worried that their scheme might be going into pension protection fund, are being advised to get their money out and put it into a SIP, which, you know, those people then would manage for high fee, or they would put into, you know, scam investments. Those firms do go into default, and those liabilities do go into the sector. So you've got this problem whereby the people who are squealing because the FSCS levy is going out of control for them are the people who don't matter if they go out of business or leave the country. The people who do matter, they're not paying, relative to their turnover or profits, a big FSCS levy.
That's so interesting, Mark. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot there. Thank you. Mr. Paul Carlier, once again, thank you for your patience. So we'll go to Paul. We'll then do a bit of wrapping up and then we'll bring things to a close. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, if you borrow the FCA's mantra in terms of consumer agreements and everything else, is that, you know, someone's entitled to have all the information they require to make an informed decision. And yet you're being asked to make a decision here without any of the information. I do think there are so many flags here, and yet again, as I said before, it seems the FCA just spends all its time brokering deals without actually investigating and seeking to enforce. And all that does is guarantees the next one and the next one and the next one. You know, we've seen it time and time again. I'd even ask, okay, how the exquisite timing of those that bowed out and drew down funds just prior to the, you know, prior to this all go, was somebody acting on material non-public information? Did somebody, you know, I mean, that's something that needs to be looked at. You know, it was somebody privy to information that others weren't privy to, and they were able to escape with most of their money intact. Now, that's insider trading. To what extent has that been looked at? I mean, it's incredible timing, and it's very simple to establish. Has whoever drew down vast sums beforehand, had they drawn down previously? Was there a pattern, or was this completely out of the blue, which would suggest that they were acting upon information that they were in possession of and that others weren't? So again, it's just everyone's ignoring the fact that there could be fraud involved here. You know, this isn't just, you know, bad management. This is, you know, and the FCA the trying to avoid saying rules were breached, or, you know, that it's brokering a deal, giving the parties involved the least damaging option for them to agree to and persuade them, a bit like Premier FX, if anyone's familiar with that deal. I mean, just again, don't get to the bottom of it, broker a deal, everyone's happy. Look, you've all got some money back, just everyone walk away and we won't get to the bottom of it. But the problem is, you know, the fact that they're not getting to the bottom of it, the flags are still there, the answers aren't forthcoming. So again, you know, what are they doing? You know, and again, it just means it's going to happen again. And Theresa Chambers is just taking up the Mark Stewart mantra of enforcement. You know, just broker a deal and let the tail wag the dog all the time.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Folks, now's your chance for any final comments or questions. Mr. Mark Northwaite, you're still here. I thought you went to bed.
I was heading out. I was just coming back on what Paul said there. I don't think it's fair to say they haven't investigated. I think there's been an awful lot of work investigated, and they will have gone over this with an absolute fine-tooth comb. I think the FCA knows exactly what's happened here. I think there is always...
in a way, Mark, sorry to interrupt you, but in a way, is what's happened actually even worse than that? They've done the investigation. They probably do know exactly what's gone on, but they're not being open and honest about it.
Well, the transparency from the FCA is always an issue, and in a lot of cases it's about public interest. In a lot of cases it's about, or their view of public interest. In a lot of cases it's about information that is market sensitive. In a lot of cases it's about the protection of the rights of the people that they're investigating. The FCA is very secretive about the outcome of its work and has refused. I mean, if you look at the back to and fro between the FCA and the Treasury Select Committee, they've actively refused to provide the detail that is requested by the Treasury Select Committee. Whether that's right or wrong is a separate question, but what I don't think is the case is that they haven't investigated. I think they have investigated. They have a lot of knowledge. They are undoubtedly doing what they think is the best thing. And that's the issue, is that they're balancing lots of interests, and those interests are conflicted. And I'm not sure that we, and I'm not are as happy as we should be about where they're placing the interests of the individual investor in that ranking. And it's always going to be a problem that an issue that you're never going to see as much as you want to see. And because of that, you're always going to be unsatisfied with the outcome. But I think the motivations. So first of all, I don't think it's correct to challenge the investigation. I think that has happened, and I don't think one is necessarily challenging their motivations. I think the decision the solution that collectively has been arrived at here merits some challenge, because I don't think it's particularly fair. As I said before, it may well be the least worst outcome. So it may be that it is in the interest of investors to vote for it. But that's a different question to, is it fair?
I think my point is that, you know, 4 years they have investigated, but they're not. And as Andy said, it's worse that despite 4 years of investigation, no one's any the wiser as to what really went on. And in the case of, it's a defunct fund now. So there's, you know, what damage can be done by disclosing the information. We've had this issue with Blackmore Bond. You know, it's, you know, the FCA literally tried to prevent an investor getting a freedom of information request, and the fact that it would be commercially sensitive information for that. But, well, hang on, it's in liquidation. There can be no damage done to it, and thankfully,
I fully agree with your standpoint, and I fully endorse the fact that when they investigate, they should give a report of their investigations. The fact is, they don't, and I think that damages confidence in the FCA. And I think that at the moment, the way this is being carried forward, it's damaging confidence in the FSCS as well. So I think there's a genuine market confidence issue, and I think there's certainly excuse for a review of the FCA's treatment of confidentiality around investigations and their obligations to report. But at the moment, this is a status quo.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll bring things to a close. My overriding thoughts are that the UK and retail British investors don't just want to have, need to have trust and confidence in the functioning of our financial services system. Every country needs that. The UK needs it particularly because our economy is so dependent in so many ways on this jewel of the crown of the City of London and the way that our financial system works. We have a situation where learned folks such as Mark Northway have commented that the communications coming out from Link and the FCA seem misleading. To my mind, that is a great big loud alarm bell. Something is going systemically wrong for that to be the case. And as Paul Carley would say, the hierarchy of oversight is failing if the regulator is complicit in putting out what is effectively misleading communications. On what basis have they got a right to not make it perfectly clear to people that there is the possibility of a restitution order being placed? I don't think they've got the right to do that. We cannot have trust and confidence in the system if we cannot trust the integrity and the authenticity of the regulatory framework that is supposed to be governing all this lot. Folks like Beryl, and no doubt many others, are going to continue to be frustrated about the lack of clarity about the way to go forward. Do you, don't you vote? If you do vote, in what way do you vote? All I'd say to you folks is that October the 10th is a very important day. Going back to what Sunil Chadha spoke about earlier, this is, I guess, something of a watershed moment. Aren't we willing to tolerate the status quo that is being put forward? And Transparency Task Force's view is Sunlight is the best disinfectant. There continues to be too much that is allowed to be taking place in the shadows. We'll fight for that to be sorted. We'll campaign for that to be sorted. And we must not let unfairness become condoned, because if we begin to condone unfairness, then where the hell's that going to end? Where on earth is that going to end? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Can we please once again put our hands together for everybody that's put a hell of a lot of volunteer time into this, particularly the folks like Mark Bishop and Alan Pyatt and Neil and Linda and everyone else that's been involved with this, Mark Northway, Paul Carlier, and many other folks as well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for bringing the session to close. Thank you. Good night to all. Good night.